April 27th is Coretta Scott King's 97th birthday. I am proud to serve as director of the Euclid Public Library and the chair of the Coretta Scott King Book Awards Roundtable Standing Marketing Committee. The Coretta Scott King Book Awards Roundtable awards African American authors and illustrators who have written books for children and teens. So they are eligible for either the John Steptoe New Author and Illustrator Award, or the main award, or of course, one of the honor awards. So today we are thrilled to talk a little bit about Coretta Scott King. Today we are joined by Dr. Queen Zabriskie. She is a passionate and creative anti-racist educator, organizer, artist, scholar, and lifelong learner. She is an associate professor of sociology and theater, dance, and performance studies at New College of Florida, where she has held the MacArthur Endowed Professorship Chair since 2019. Zabriskie is a co-author with Dr. Harvey Young of Black Theater is Black Life and Oral History of Chicago, Theater and Dance, 1970 through 2010, which traces the development of Black theater and dance communities in Chicago, Illinois. She is also a 2020 Sarasota Magazine Unity Award recipient. So she is joining us from the Coretta Scott King Center in Antioch College, and she's going to talk about Coretta Scott's experience there. So welcome, Dr. Queen Zabriskie, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here again to share more about Coretta Scott King's time at Antioch College and just share more of the resources and information that we have here in the archive at Antioch College. And I didn't update my bio for you, but updates is that I'm now a faculty member here at Antioch College. So
oh, congratulations.
thank you.
It's done. That's really great news.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you
I'm
for
really
sharing
excited.
that.
So I'm an associate professor of sociology and performance studies here, and I'm the acting director of the Coretta Scott King Center. So really excited to be here, and came to Antioch because of what was happening at New College of Florida, and learned about the existence of the Coretta Scott King Center and the work that's happening here, and then began to dig in the archive and was amazed by what I learned. And Coretta Scott King is one of those figures who we know so much about because of her work on the civil rights movement and her work advocating for peace and as an ambassador. But she's also someone that there's a lot more to learn about because oftentimes you don't have people talking about her in her own right and the work that she did, and especially the work that she did prior to marrying Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and as a student at Antioch. So when I got a chance to look in the archive and saw what we had, I was really excited. So I'm excited to share a little bit of what I've learned, and excited to be in conversation and continue this work. So let me pull up this presentation. And so before I begin, I want to just give a big thank you to Scott Sanders, who is our archivist here at Antioch College, and just a wealth of information, and has just been so great in directing me in terms of things that I want to look at, and even giving me greater context so that I could quickly try to understand more about this powerful and impactful woman, Coretta Scott King. So this is a picture of Coretta Scott King from her first year class photo in 1945 when she first came to Antioch College. And I love this photo because oftentimes growing up, I would see photos of her later in life. And so I love the photos of her here and around the center here where I am that show her at different ages. And, as someone who, loves being a college professor and working with college students, I can think also back to my experience as a college student, having someone that I could sort of look at and relate to was really important for me understanding the kind of impact that I could have on the world. And so I love this photo, and I, again, love all the photos like this that we have up in the center of Coretta Scott King, because they're reminders of how every single last one of us can really have such a powerful impact on our world, our community, and our world. So Coretta Scott King was born on April 27th, as we know, because today's her birthday, 1927 in Heiberger, Alabama, to Obadiah Scott and Bernice McMurray Scott. She attended Lincoln Normal School in Marion, Alabama, where she graduated as the valedictorian of her class. And she started at Antioch College in 1945, and she was recruited by a woman named Jessie Treichler, who was the special assistant to the president of the college at that time, and also the chair of an important committee called the Race Relations Committee. And she received a scholarship, an interracial scholarship, which helped her to come to Antioch. What's important about this scholarship is that, and about her connection to Antioch, is that her sister, Edith Scott Bagley, received this scholarship also. And in fact, she was the first person to receive this scholarship at Antioch. And that scholarship brought her to Antioch in 1943. So when Coretta Scott King came on campus, Coretta's older sister was here. So this scholarship actually was a main way in which the college recruited students of color, Black students, initially just because of the amount of money they had in the scholarship, but they expanded it towards its end to include more minority students and other students. But this scholarship was around from around until 1954. And they actually raised about $128,000 for scholarships for students at the time. And in fact, it was the students themselves and the faculty and the administrators who were raising the funds. So in the archive, there's a really wonderful letter from a student at Antioch at that time to their mom and dad. And it's like, dear mom and dad, right? This is, we're doing this important work of trying to make sure that there are more Black students on campus, please contribute to this. So, the students at the time were really involved with raising the funds as well as recruiting students. And so in a senior paper, for example, that Coretta Scott King writes towards the end of her time at Antioch, she talks about how much her sister talked to her about Antioch and the story she filled her head with about Antioch, and that really sort of made her want to come to the college. But going to Antioch was really important for Coretta because it helped her to work towards something that she and her mother valued tremendously, and that was being educated. So in a piece that Coretta Scott King wrote for Opportunity, the Journal of Negro Life, while a student at Antioch in 1948, which is a journal produced by the National Urban League, in this piece titled Why I Came to College, King stated, the only Negro adults of the community in which I lived who seemed to be held in general esteem were my teachers, who were apparently respected for their positions, their training, and their leadership ability. And so this desire to be respected, to have freedom of movement, to develop her own capacities, to prove that she was not inferior and to understand all different types of people motivated her to go to college, and particularly a college in the North, and a college that in its founding days, with struggle, but definitely still affirmed a policy of non-discrimination based on sex and gender and race. And so she wanted to be in that kind of environment as a way to develop herself and to achieve her full potential and to be respected. And so this desire sustained her throughout her time at Antioch, particularly as she experienced some of the challenges that she experienced. And so I love this quote from her, right? May I reiterate that as a Negro, I have to be darn good to be respected in our American democratic society at this time. That's why I had to go to college, right? So this is about, you know, respect and equal treatment and access and not being sort of discriminated against because of the color of her skin. So when Coretta came to campus, there were 6 Black students. And when her sister transferred from Antioch College 2 years later, there were 12 Black students. This increase in the number of Black students was really due to the work of the Race Relations Committee. Go to the next slide. The Race Relations Committee itself was founded in 1941 out of the college's Civil Liberties Committee. And it was a mechanism to address racial inequality at Antioch College, increase the number of non-white students at the college, and improve race relations on campus. So in about 1935, the Young Socialist Association on campus, because of what was going on in the world at that time, because of what was going on in the Communist Party in the US, they put a survey out on campus asking about people's opinions about race and race relations. And the results of this survey really shocked everyone, right? They found that people did not have as open ideas as they thought they would have, particularly at this liberal institution. So there's a document in the archive that gives some of the results of this, and it begins with this statement about Antioch being so liberal and how surprising it is, right, that that some of the opinions that were expressed in the survey. And so they found that students were a little less open than the faculty, but from that survey and from everyone's shock about what happened and in conversation with what was going on in the larger world, folks on campus really began this renewed effort to try to bring some Black students to campus to increase and to work on race relations on campus. They were really clear that we can't just bring people to campus. We have to make sure that the campus is going to be an accepting place for them. So that really fueled a lot of the energy that created the Civil Liberties Committee. And then, when that committee began to look into race relations, they found they had so much work that they decided, let's create this separate committee. And so this committee was composed of faculty, staff, and students. And they, did things like looked at policies. They also were behind some of the early efforts to desegregate businesses in the local community. So, for example, in 1942, students at Antioch College and students at Wilberforce College, which is a historically Black college and university, that's about 15 minutes away. So students at Wilberforce University and Antioch College worked together to desegregate the local motion picture theater in Yellow Springs. And so they went into the theater, bought their tickets. The Black students went upstairs to the Black section, and the white students went downstairs. And once the movie started, the Black students came downstairs and sat downstairs and watched the movie alongside the white students. The white students had held some spaces for them. And so in a report about race relations at the campus, Jessie Trigler talks about this as she uses the language of nonviolence, right, to talk about this and to talk about the way in which people, through those efforts, they were able to successfully desegregate that theater. And shortly after that moment, the theater changed ownership, and the new owners had a policy of non-discrimination. Another example of the work that this committee did is that at that time, all of the barbershops in town were segregated. And so Black patrons had to go to another city to get their hair cut. And so this committee talked to one of the owners in 1946, and they persuaded this owner to serve Black customers, and he lost about a third of his customers because of his decision to serve Black customers. But they persuaded him that the students at the college would patronize him, and that they would he would be able to replace those people who he would lose. And so then he agreed to do that. In the picture is a document that this committee created, and this is from 1949, and so Coretta Scott King joined this committee, so that's why I'm going into great detail on this, but she joined this committee, and she was a part of this committee at this time, so this would have been a publication that this committee put out while she was on it. And this is a later version. So the first version of this publication, No One Group, comes out in 1946. And so this is an updated version. But as the subtitle says, it's a statement about the beliefs and work of the Race Relations Committee. And essentially it's a brochure that puts forth, ideas about the importance of making sure that everyone has access to education, and that once they're educated, everyone has access to fulfilling and living out their full potentials for the development of our nation, and to make sure that everyone, because it's necessary for the development of our nation, has a role that they can play, and that there are no barriers, artificial barriers, put on everyone's ability to participate fully in our society and in our country in particular, our nation in particular. And what's really interesting about this brochure and the 1946 version in particular is that it goes through and it's dispelling some of the myths around, the idea of Black inferiority, right? And so it's like, there's no biological basis for race, right? And, you have there's a line that's like, you have good and bad genes in all types of people, right? And so really sort of going through, and some of the dominant arguments for segregation and really dominant arguments about Black inferiority are being refuted in this. And then this brochure goes on to talk about, again, the work of the Race Relations Committee, and try to sort of get people to contribute to the fund. And they got a lot of, local people, parents and alumni to contribute, but they were also able to get folks like A. Philip Randolph actually contributed money to this fund. So they were able to get bigger name folks to contribute. And this committee also brought speakers to campus to talk about their efforts around challenging the color line and challenging Jim Crow, and some of the successes that they had. So this was an important committee. And as I said, Coretta Scott King joined this committee while she was a student, and worked on this committee. There's actually some minutes where she's mentioned in terms of her reporting out on some of the work she's doing in the local community. Another person who was particularly, let me go back. So I wanted to talk about this committee in detail too, because this is the context in which she's entering Antioch College, right? And so there's all of this work, all of this conversation going on and tensions, right, around race relations, around and some people who are welcoming and wanting people to be there, and other folks who are not so welcoming, and some folks for whom this is new, right? And so they've, maybe never interacted so freely and in the way that they were able to interact with Black students on campus at that time when she was there. And so, she was able to make some connections, but she also struggled to adjust to the different contexts and to make connections in her first a year to 2.5 years at the college. In particular, while her older sister was there for her first 2 years, she struggled to carve out her own identity. People would call her Little Scotty because she was, because her older sister was there. And it wasn't until her sister left that she started to be known as Corey and develop her own sort of identity more fully on campus. She did have some people who she talked to, but it seemed like from her own sort of writings about what her experience was like at the college as a senior, reflecting back on that, from her writings there in her senior paper, it seemed like she felt like her attempts to connect were not always reciprocated to the same degree that she was attempting to connect. And so that was hard for her. She also felt like because of the impact of Jim Crow segregation, that she did not have the same preparation as some of her peers. And so, she went to a high school that she greatly respected and had wonderful educators, and her high school produced a number of prominent African-American leaders. She was also the valedictorian of her class, and she directed the choir at her church and played musical instruments and sang soprano. So she came to Antioch with a number of valuable skills and accomplishments already. However, she really felt like the structural inequality, right, that was the Jim Crow system underdeveloped her when compared to other students. And so in response, she invested in her own growth and development, right? To counter the disinvestment and the underdevelopment that was the Jim Crow system. And so Antioch has this 100-year-old plus tradition called co-op, which was started by Arthur Morgan, who was the president of the college when it reopened in 1921. And during co-op, students don't take classes, they work a job in whatever field that they're interested in. And so during her first co-op, Coretta Scott King was on campus, and when she wasn't working, she was in the library studying, and she was trying to fill what she felt were some of her gaps. And so this is really what we at Antioch love to see from our students. And so she was right in line with really being actively involved in her own growth and development in this early moment, but you could see that she was doing this throughout her entire time at Antioch and beyond. And so she talked to her peers, talked to her advisor. Finally, I could not get that to get bigger, but it just did automatically on me. So she talked to her peers. She used the classes she took to really develop a greater awareness of her own socialization, especially of the way in which that Jim Crow segregation had shaped her, even as she and her family resisted and worked to defy the place that the system would put her in. In 1946, Antioch College hired its first Black faculty member, Walter F. Anderson, who was the chair of the music department. And so he is a 1937 graduate of Oberlin College. At the time he was hired, he was the musical director at Karamu House, which is a theater in Cleveland. And he was not only just the first Black faculty member at the college, but he was the first Black person to head a music department at a historically Black college and university, so at a predominantly white institution, a historically white institution. He was the first Black person to head a music department there. And he was an accomplished composer, and he was from Zanesville, Ohio. And in an article, in a 1991 article in Black Issues in Higher Education, Anderson said that he felt that joining the faculty at Antioch would be a historic opportunity and a chance to prove that Blacks could function in this environment, right? Being an elite, predominantly sort of white, radical environment. And so Anderson had a profound impact on Coretta Scott King. So for example, in 1946, she was a music counselor at Camp Karamu in Brecksville, Ohio, where Walter F. Anderson was the director. And so this camp was established by the Playhouse Settlement, which later became Karamu House. And the Cleveland Historical Society describes this as the oldest African-American theater in the US. This theater had an interracial counselor. This camp had an interracial counselor staff, but it served African-American children from the settlement house. And, this experience at the camp, she writes about how psychologically healing and positive this experience at the camp was, to just sort of be in a new environment and be in an environment where she really felt accepted. And she was so interested in this work that during her next co-op, she actually went to work at the Friendly Settlement House in Cleveland to see if she wanted to go into social work. And she decided not to go in that direction, and had a challenging experience there, but came back to campus and really got more involved in the campus and really had a period of time where it seemed like she found her rhythm at Antioch, because she was becoming more involved on campus. So she became more involved in racial justice and peace movements on campus and in the community. And she specifically joined the Race Relations Committee at this time, and was also involved in other organizations like the NAACP. And through this committee, again, she was working on, that brochure I showed earlier was from 1949 while she was on this committee, but she was working on efforts around desegregation on campus and, or race relations, I should say, on campus, and desegregation in the community, and exposed to speakers, again, who were talking about what they were doing around the country. So for example, there's a presentation by the director of the Urban League in Dayton, and he's talking about some of the organizing that they were doing in Pittsburgh with the students on campus. So she's being exposed to all of the organizing that's happening through this committee and being involved in that. So as a music major, and so this is a picture, let me pause. This is a picture of Walter Franklin Anderson, who again was at the college into 1974. And so she also, because she was a music major, was involved in a number of activities and presentations in the music department. So this is an image of a 1948 presentation of Elothin by W.S. Gilbert and Arthur Sullivan. And you can kind of see, Coretta Scott King. Let me see if I can get my annotation tools working and circle her a little bit. I think I can do it, but yeah, you can see that this is Coretta Scott King here in this picture. And she's a fairy in this production. And this is from March of 1948, and it was performed at the Yellow Springs Opera House. And it's a presentation by the Yellow Springs Area Theater in the Antioch Music Department. And so this is a great photo of some of the things that she did as a part of the music department. In 1948, she also had her first full recital at Second Baptist Church in Springfield, Ohio. And so these are two articles that appeared about this concert that was in November of 1948. Oh, let me go back. This first article is from the Springfield Sun, and then the second one is from the Dayton Daily News. So, so the wider area, there was advertisement about this concert in the wider area. So with Dr. Anderson, Coretta decided that she was on a 6-year plan at Antioch, and so at that time, students could be on different sort of year plans as a part of the Antioch curriculum, and designated a major in education and music. And one of the requirements for her degree in education was to complete some student teaching. And so she had some student teaching experience from her involvement with the Antioch School, which was a private school connected to the college. However, she wanted to teach, and for this particular certification, she needed to teach within the public school. And the public school system did not have Black teachers at that time, and so she was denied the ability to teach because of this. She challenged this, and she tried to enlist the support of students and administrators on campus. She was unsuccessful in her challenge. And the college worked with the state to waive this requirement. And this was significant because she was the first Black student to become eligible to do this, and then to have, segregation laws block her from being able to, or segregation, I should say, practices block her from being able to do this, was a major blow for her. And the way in which she didn't feel like the college gave her enough support, really, she writes about how that made her question what she was doing and what everybody was saying about what the college stood for. And it's really interesting because you see in the archive, there's a number of different documents where people are writing about this experience and really, asking questions about, well, what is the role of the college? And, should we, if an employer does not accept people of color, should we as a college still work with them in our co-op program, in our placement department? Should the placement department work with them or not? And so there are a number of documents where people are asking this question because she experienced this, but there are other employers that the white students have access to and are able to go to, but that the Black students are not able to go to. There's one in clinical psychology in particular that shows up in a lot of the documents. The college also talks about how much more it's costing the college to find placements for Black students because of these Jim Crow practices, and how they're concerned, right? There's a document where they talk about, unless a student puts down something about their racial identity, they don't disclose that to employers. And so they're concerned that they may send a student somewhere to a community or to an employer, and that student might have a negative or a dangerous or be harmed, right, because of racism, right, and people with who are racist and have racial animus. And so there's a conversation that goes on, and so her situation is mentioned a couple of times in documents, and the college, at least in what I've seen, they decide that, they're going to navigate it by trying to place Black students in places that are accepting of them and trying to increase the number of employers for both Black and white students that are not governed by Jim Crow practices and racism, but that they're not going to not deal with employers who have those practices. So it's really interesting to see how they try to play both sides, but there's also a really interesting guide for students going on co-op, students of color going on co-op, that is all about trying to tell them how to navigate racism and Jim Crow practices in that moment while going out into the world to work. There is one document that talks about the fact that this is what they're going to encounter in the world. And so rather than shielding folks, they're also talking about, hey, we need to teach people how to navigate this because this is what the world is like now. And so for this moment, though, this is Coretta Scott King in her memoir. She writes about my life, my love, my legacy. She writes about this as her first sort of real public stance against racism. And so this is a really important moment for her raising her voice to advocate for herself. In 1951, with the help of Walter Anderson, Coretta transfers to the New England Conservatory. And this is where she meets Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who's there working on his PhD in systemic theology in Boston. And they were married in 1953. And she graduated from the conservatory with a bachelor's of music in 1954. And it's not until 1967 when she receives her degree from Antioch College. There's a social science exam.
Dr. Zabriskie, Dr. Zabriskie, can you switch your slide? I think we're not seeing the slide from
Oh, sorry.
1951.
Thank you. Thank you. She receives her BA in education and music from Antioch College, and she, in minutes from faculty meetings at that time, they actually have a number of students who are not passing that final exam that they have there. And so at that moment in 1967, they had changed the policy where you could either take the exam or complete a course. And so she had already successfully completed the course that would be able to replace the exam. So the faculty at that time determined that she had completed all of her degree requirements. And so she's awarded her degree in 1967, and her name appears in the commencement program from 1967. And the last slide, so this image is from 1965, which is when Dr. King was the commencement speaker at the college. And when she graduated in 1967, he came back and was in the audience then. And in 1982, she was the commencement speaker at the college. And so this is an image from when she was the commencement speaker at the college. And, she talks about, the way in which Antioch really prepared her for the work that she went on to do in the movement, particularly because it helped her to be able to navigate the chaos and remain calm and continue to move forward and continue to fight. And that was something that she thought was important and useful in the movement. And in her memoir, My Life, My Love, My Legacy, she writes about how before she had the words naming something called the beloved community, she experienced that at Antioch, right? She experienced learning with and from and interacting with people of different faith backgrounds, different races, ethnicities. And so that, when she was able to experience that possibility on campus, that was really important and powerful for her understanding the kind of world that she knew she wanted and was possible. So I will pause there and I
Well,
will
thank you
tell
so much.
everyone to
I
go to
want
this
to,
gallery.
yeah, it is so hard for me whenever I hear you speak, Dr. Zabriskie. I just have a thousand questions for you. And I just find it so fascinating because she graduated from Antioch when she was 40 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
So
you.
she graduated from the New England Conservatory when she was in her 20s. But she had to come back because of all, like you said, the Jim Crow practices. She didn't get that degree until she was 40 years old. But my question, I always want to highlight that because I think that's so important for us to know. We always think we got to do everything when we're 18 or when we're our 20s, but sometimes you got to continue to
No,
fight until you in your 40s or 50s.
yeah.
But
And you
can
got to
you
wait for
talk a
people
little
to
bit
catch up
about
to you, right? She had to wait
exactly,
for folks to catch up to her, right? But that
exactly,
doesn't, so it was the policy, but it's a better policy later on where it's like you can do this or this, right? That's more inclusive.
exactly.
Yeah. So
Can you talk a little bit and then if anyone has any questions, please either unmute yourself or put it in the chat or the Q&A. But I just want you to talk a little bit about what's going on today. We have students um, protesting across the country on college campuses. And I just find it so fascinating that as we talk about and celebrate the life of Coretta Scott King, how much she was doing as an 18, 19, 20-year-old young
yes.
person. And we always think that she really wasn't doing anything until she met and married Dr. King. So can you talk a little bit about
She
that?
was, yeah, she was. And the students were. I mean, I think when I look at what's happening, I am filled with hope. And I am reminded how in all of our movements, it is the youth and the students who are out there risking and putting their lives on the line to challenge these different forms of inequality. I mean, in her moment, right, they are breaking the law, right? And they're breaking local law. So what's interesting about 1942, the theater desegregation, is that the state of Ohio had passed a law saying that segregation was illegal, but like so many things, it had not trickled down to local communities. And so those students actually went into that theater with the law saying, hey, this is the law. You need to not, you need to change this. And so the theater changed it, but other entities did not, right? So, and it's not until 1948 when an ordinance is passed in Yellow Springs, sort of outlawing segregation. But again, there's still businesses, it's 1964 when there's a huge movement amongst the Antioch College students against a barbershop that is still segregated, right? And so this is a long, long movement. And like before, you see now where it's the students that are at the forefront of sort of saying this is not acceptable, right? This is not okay. We're seeing clear violations of existing laws.
Yes.
And we're seeing the ways in which at some institutions, different laws and policies are getting passed to
Yes.
to make something illegal that is not illegal, right? To take away our First Amendment rights. So the students are there speaking out. What I think is also interesting, I was talking to some people now, because we have what's going on in terms of the campus protests now, but we also have all of this huge anti-DEI movement and all of the anti-LGBTQ plus laws that are going on and being enacted across the country. And so I just talked to someone who was at the college who they're, having the same kind of concerns for our queer students and sending them to certain places and job placements that are not going to be accepting of them. Our queer students, our trans students in particular, right? And how do you navigate that as an institution? How do you help students navigate that? Because you have to. You don't want anything to happen to any of our students because of someone else's fear and prejudice and discrimination.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
Dr.
so
Zabriskie,
there's
before we
so
go,
many.
we got
Yeah.
two questions for you from the audience.
Okay.
Folks are interested if you could talk a little bit more about the Coretta Scott King Center at Antioch, and then if you can share your contact information or email or website where folks can learn more. And then there was a compliment from Judy. She said, "It's so good to hear about Coretta. Most of us only knew her as Dr. King's wife. It's also good to hear about her graduation from Antioch at 40 as an encouragement." So if you can talk a little bit more about the center and how to reach out to you.
Sure, I definitely can. So the center at the college was started in 2007. And it actually also comes out of struggle on campus. So what I've learned about the founding of this center is that, and this is from an interview with our current board chair, Shelby Chestnut. He talked about, or our current board chair talked about the way in which at the college in 2004, and I'm going to just read an excerpt from his interview because I think this is just so powerful. He says, for context, in 2004, I was a part of a group of students that held the board hostage with demands. There was an effort by the board of trustees called the Renewal Commission, and it was basically forcing curriculum on faculty and changing how the student course offerings were done. And it was a deep prioritization of the needs of students of color. So I and other students of color had a list of demands. And while the trustees were having lunch at the Antioch Inn, we stood outside and had signs protesting them. And then we went to their meeting in the Antioch main room building afterwards. And they refused to leave until their demands were met. And so they did this on campus, and word got out. And sometime later, the Ku Klux Klan showed up and put leaflets around campus, and they organized, the Ku Klux Klan organized a march in town, a protest in town, and the leaders of the NAACP chapter showed up on campus asking students what they needed. Students from Wilberforce, Wright State, Central State, they all showed up asking the students at Antioch what they needed, and they just decided to let the students, let the Klan protest. And the students actually left town and didn't even interact with them. And what happened after that was they got increased funding and to the Multicultural Center. And under the then president, Steve Laurie, this is again from this interview with our board chair, a group of people, including students, went down to Atlanta to meet with Coretta Scott King and shared some of what happened. And she was very supportive of the students of color. And that's when she agreed that Antioch could rename the Multicultural Center the Coretta Scott King Center for Cultural and Intellectual Freedom. And so, of course, she passes in 2006. And so the college works with the family to get the rights to be able to continue to name the center in her honor. And so the center is a hub of learning, of action around racial and social justice. And the individuals who've directed the center before have done a wonderful job of bringing, speakers to campus, anti-racism workshops, workshops and trainings on organizing and activism for students. Here currently, we've shifted things a little bit, and so now we have a student resource room that is dedicated to resources that focus on BIPOC and LGBTQ plus individuals. We are offering more classes through the center. So a number of my classes have happened in the center, and I teach about race and racism and intersectionality and Black feminist thought. And so a lot of those classes have happened through the center. And we've also, in January, we sponsored an event with the International Peace Center in Dayton, where we had the Gandhi and King families speak at the center and on our campus and talk about the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. So we had Tushar Gandhi and Reverend Joel King and Gregory Foster, who's Coretta Scott King's cousin, speak on campus. And so we're excited to continue that work. We're working on some Juneteenth programming right now. And
what's your web address, Dr. Zabriskie?
Here, let me give it to you.
For the Coretta Scott King Center.
You can find it through the Antioch College website. And I'll also put my email address in.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, we're working, just for heads up for the audience, we're working on a global racial and social justice summit for February of 2025. So I'll make sure I send when we have the information, I'll send it so you can send it out to your audiences and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And if there's anything that the Coretta Scott King committee, the book committee can do, please let me know. We'd love to be a part of the program. But thank you so much, Dr. Zabriskie, and thank you everyone for your support this Saturday afternoon as we celebrate Coretta Scott King's 97th anniversary. And I encourage you to read her biography, learn more about her. She has such a fascinating life story outside of her husband. The things that she did when they were married were amazing. But if you look at her life before King and her life after King, you almost she worked hard for that for Dr. King, so we'll let it stand. But I just want to also encourage everyone, please, if you can, we have some upcoming programs at the Euclid Public Library, so please go to our website as well, euclidlibrary.org. So we thank you again, Dr. Zabriskie, and thank you everyone for joining this afternoon, and have a great day.